I would like to tell why I got interested in this participatory research approach and what I did in my career and some of the spaces I visited where I find resistances also I will delay very quickly. I was actually an ardent fan of quantitative research. I was trained in that research. But when we began these interprofessional dialogues with the Association of Schools of Social Work in 1995, during that period, I was exposed to this kind of research. Though I was familiar with qualitative research, but I found this interesting. I went to Sussex, Robert Chalmers was there, I was exposed to that. The kind of paradigm that the people-centered approach, the participatory research. But when I came and participated in prayer in these meetings, then I think I got my faith in this kind of approach got strengthened. So then the interprofessional dialogues, we propagated this idea, we trained people, and as part of it, I conducted a small study. Still I remember, this is one of the interesting studies where we studied, the title of the study is Fighting Industrial Pollution, Amrita can recollect it. And it was very interesting that by that time I did one or two studies sponsored by UGC. They were all survey. In this study, we studied 5 villages which were impacted by lead pollution of zinc smelter plant located in Visakhapatnam. And the villages were ecologically completely impaired, health impairment was there, lot of mentally retarded children were born there. It was a very interesting study. So we did this study and we used social mapping, seasonal calendar, all those maps because I was young then at that time. And we produced a report, and there was already a community-based organization in place fighting this industrial pollution, fighting with the zinc smelter plant, filed a case, the People's Collective, and we gave this report to them. And it took, I think, we made quite a number of visits to the village, spoke to the people, prepared this report, and submitted this report. This report they submitted to the High Court. And it was one of the important evidences. So that the High Court gave a verdict saying that asked the zinc smelter plant to close the lead smelter plant. And it was closed within 1 or 2 months. I always remember with satisfaction the kind of a, action that could produce because of this kind of an evidence. I do not say that this is the only factor, but this was one of the important factors. The villagers came to our department and told us that this is what has happened behind the village. So that is how I developed a kind of a faith and interest in this methodology. And I still remember Rajesh, myself, and we going around addressing board of studies chairpersons, head of the departments, to telling them that this is the kind of a methodology that is there. You can look at the world in a different way. Now I do agree with you that there is a colonial framework for the kind of knowledge that we learn in the universities predominantly. That most of the knowledge we learn is Eurocentric. I know all that. I do agree with that. But you can't do anything. There is no other way. Most of the universities, the knowledge is structured in that manner, and you are aware that how qualitative research made efforts and made a kind of to find an entry for a qualitative research methodology in the university system was very difficult during the 1960s, but it could make an entry into the 1960s. So there is a journey, there is a history that happens which we can learn from that. If I look at my, I was always invited, I am always invited even now to speak about participatory research. As I go along, I always revise it the way I always make it more and more less technical rather than more technical and make it appear as if it's a different kind of methodology. I always hated it. I never did it. But I have found certain spaces of resistance. For instance, when I was a director of Center for Social Studies, I was participating in this directors meeting. Several times I told the body that why don't we invite people like Rajesh or whatever it may be. There are several other people and listen to them so that there is an alternative paradigm of looking at the reality. You know, in ICSSR is dominated by social sciences, especially economics, and economists are hard to convince. They are primarily number people. They start a paper with an introduction. In the middle, they will quote a quotation and put everything into an equation and then come to the conclusion. They are trained like that. So those are the people whom I found difficult to convince. And perhaps I don't know whether Rajesh has received an invitation or not, because then there was Professor Thorat also, where I suggested to him. So there are certain disciplinary spaces which needed to be perhaps allied with, and these are sociologists, anthropologists who are easy to work with. But these are the people I think who are far, far away from the kind of paradigm or the kind of perspective that of looking at reality is very hard to be dealt with those people. So that is what I am thinking. So disciplinary spaces are there which needs to be looked into. And there are certain broad partnerships which we can deal with. Perhaps as we go along, I can make a mention of that. ICSR is one. There are ICSR research institutions. I don't think which we have ever explored. I don't know. As far as we have worked with in universities, but there are research institutions, 28 research institutions in this country, which are hardcore research institutions, which needs to be allied with. I think which can be. Perhaps we can have a dialogue with them. So these are some of the spaces which we can look at.
I'd like to share a few of my experience. You talked about that colonial model of data collection. Somehow one wonders whether data collected through that model is reliable or not. I'll give you one example. When I was studying in university, during my summer vacations, one professor came from a very prestigious institution. He said, "You guys are free, why don't you come to Ajmer and do this data collection, everything is free." And that survey was about the water problem in the city, and it had almost 50 questions. And when we honestly tried to get those questions filled, we got a lot of scolding and shouting from people because they had no water and the questions were totally different. Then we realized that if we follow that questionnaire, we are definitely going to be beaten up. So we reduced them from 15 to 20, 20 to 30. Finally, what we did was, you will be surprised, without even going inside the house, we used to get the data, we used to look at their water tank and see how much is the capacity. And based on that report, that professor wrote so many papers. That's the first experience. Second experience I would like to share with you when we came to Priya. And there was one gentleman who I consider also my teacher, Vijay Kanere. And we started working on occupational health. Smeda is here, we worked on that. And we took up methodology of participatory research in medical sciences on occupational health technologies. In those days, those established institutions like NIOH, BSIC, they were laughing at us that how we can use all these things. But the evidence which came through these type of research from the shop floor made them to understand and also recognize where the problem is, and a lot of people got compensation. And interestingly, they adopted many of these methodologies in their own studies after that. I think these cases were documented in Priya somewhere. So I think we have to find out if this methodology is being adopted by various institutions, but sometimes they feel shy of accepting the fact. I think this is very important. And third, when I was saying Jagdaji about this, the state of volunteer organizations using now in that same methodology, because we have seen, if you go to any, say even your Minister of Home Affairs, Jagdaji, and say that these are the problems, they don't believe, they don't. But once you collect this data from various workshops, various interactions, from people themselves, from institutions, these are the concrete evidence which are collected through engagement of people directly. And same data is then used back for capacity building of these institutions. I think that one has to capture that methodology is there, accepted by people, but I think we have to tell them to finally they should recognize it.
But more like a question, because when I was listening to both of you and looking back at my own journey, it's a very glorious past. And one wonders whether the future is as glorious as the past is, because at the stage where we are in the civil society movement in India and the Asia and the South Pacific, a lot of organizations are now focusing on advocacy. And they're saying that whatever research we are doing, whether it is participatory research or whatever we are doing in participation, we believe in that. But our agenda is advocacy. And when we go to the advocacy events where we are heard or where we get a space, one, the space is so limited. The entry is so prohibitive, no? You only get like 1 or 2 slots and you get a few minutes to talk. And in those few minutes to talk, the testimonials don't have that much of value as the numbers have. And even if a study like Ajmer, which you did, would have much more significance as compared to testimonials of 10 people saying that. Because what they are looking at is how many things can be gathered from here, build our advocacy. So what is the stage of a participatory advocacy to happen? Where does the research lead to?
For the reflection which we have heard very intently this far, I was trying to establish a linkage between the participatory methodology and the empowerment. Because I find, I mean, as you mentioned, that in the 21st century we are finding that the pace of participatory research and methodology is slowing down. Because as I see it, the mankind is always power hungry. They want power. If they feel empowered, I am sure the participatory methodology will gain much faster and better. The people who are educated, the people who are learned, the people who know are very few. The common man does not understand as to how a participatory methodology empowers him. If we try and spread it in such a way, if we orchestrate our methodology in such a way that a common man feels that he is empowered, I am sure this entire process will gain much greater momentum. The empowerment has to come in because that is what the humankind is looking for. You look for the humankind, you look for the country, you look for the business. Everybody is looking for power. The moment he feels that he is empowered, I think he takes more and more interest in that particular method of work to proceed further. Thank you.
Research, and we talked about its conversion into participatory action and development framework. For the last 1 year, is another space I've been slowly understanding. That's this whole space of CSR. And we have all these companies, a whole lot of money being pumped in. And the people we engage in CSR, the people who are responsible for CSR are mostly corporate communication people for whom branding and quantitative deliveries, processes don't really matter. And there are a whole lot of people of Rajesh Bhai's stature, a lot of young IIM guys who kind of left their high-paying corporate and they are coming into the social development field. So that's another space, I think, where there is a lot of potential for this kind of language and processes to have a say. Right now, they're not there. And they're actually, a lot of the interventions are more at the level of the conventional charity, welfare. They do talk about sustainability and some kind of, but they actually do not understand those processes in detail, and I don't think they really put too much value on the process bit of it. So I think that could be, that is one area where along with universities and government, that's another area where there is potential for influence.
The evidence-based research is what which can be replicable to the greater area, but that does not reduce the kind of importance of the participatory research. The participatory research can be used to a particular geographic area and can be used to improve the kind of a development of that particular area itself, rather than being applicable for the whole state or for the country. The only thing which could be required to make it more sellable is that to tap the research institute, as well as a lot of universities are coming up with multidisciplinary subjects. There we can tap.
What role do you see for technology to be used in participatory research methodology? And I'm asking this question because even if you look at the use of Facebook or use of Twitter, and if the fundamental basis for participatory research is people's knowledge, a lot of information which used to be in drawing room or in sort of internal domain of people are coming out in the form of sharing. Now there is a lighter part of it, but is there a methodology by which we could look at the way people are sharing their opinion, their knowledge, their experience through this technology, which is now widely available. Of course, there is a bit of digital divide where all the tribal peoples are not on Facebook, or certain categories of people are not on the Facebook. But there's still a large majority of people who are using this technology to express their, whether it is anguish, whether it is their pleasure, whether it is their own lived experience. So what role do you see in sort of using technology in participatory research? Can I also have the second thing? I guess the future is bright for participatory research, not necessarily in exactly the way you coined or you understood or you sort of talked about participatory research, but a kind of adaptation to the new society. If you look at the way people are learning, there's a huge difference in people's capacity as you compare in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and the time when you talked about participatory research.
We weren't doing it in the 1930s.
No, I'm saying that over the last 100 years, people's knowledge capacities have extended, enormously. Now, how do we take that into consideration while talking about participatory research? People know much better than they used to know in earlier days. By simple example could be, you look at the way the social movements and the civil society actions on, say, the transparency and accountability movements. The alternative way, the way people are bringing out information and using it for their benefit. It's a huge movement around the world. So how do you look at participatory research by looking at these kind of examples which have a widespread effect on the society?
Because when you talk of knowledge and voice and the language that we use here, you always use, whether you use farmers, whether you use people, forest guards, it's very gender biased language because it's presumed to include women. And I was just wondering, because your whole network was so dominant with men. I mean, I would hate to say it, but the two of you sitting there today represent that network. And all the other people that I knew, whether it was Paul Mangula, whether it was Pancho, whether it was everyone else, it was so dominantly men that I wondered where the women's perspective really came in. And I'm still wondering about that today. In all the examples we use, in all the language we use, very good to say feminist standpoint theory, but what about just the common woman who's not a feminist? And does her knowledge just not add to the body of knowledge that we're looking for? And how are we including that? And that's a challenge I'm going to raise because we're still talking to dominant male perspective in research. So how are you going to address that?
But, do you see any threat to participatory research in future? And if you do, then what would it be the kind of threats that you actually perceive? Because participatory research is not only about the process. It's also a tool of empowerment, right? And a tool of empowerment for food, a tool of empowerment for the powerless. Now, somewhere, like I heard a word here, like sellable. Now, who do you actually sell this to, right? And if this word, this kind of technology and the tools actually get into the domain of those who are already powerful, to extract knowledge in a way that kind of further strengthens them. That is the real use of participatory research, or is it actually a threat? And you shouldn't be actually thinking about the sellability of it, rather just stopping the non-sellability of it beyond the
So we have a reaction that not only somebody liked the statement that illiteracy is not the same as being unknowledgeable, and also English language knowledge is not knowing English is not the same as not having knowledge. That is from a reflection from the online audience. I wanted to put a question about the future, what makes the future, because
as you said that alternative cost-benefit analysis for projects like land mining or dam building gives a very different results when you do alternative cost-benefit analysis based on local knowledge. Now the government is making laws where so local knowledge becomes irrelevant, where they are saying that social impact need not be looked at in the new land acquisition law. So what kind of future then that gives us to the local knowledge?
The way to understand this kind of work is to understand the relations of power in a society, in a family, in a community, in an organization. And we always talk about changing relations of power as a step towards, bringing about justice, equity, inclusion, etc. Because exclusion, marginalization, exploitation, physical or other forms of violence are all manifestations of unequal relations of power. And the more powerful, partly through formal authority and partly otherwise, tend to perpetuate their point of view. There's a classical saying, the ruling perspective is the perspective of the ruling classes. So in a way, participatory research is a way of enabling the relatively powerless in a community, in a family, in a context, to be able to articulate their point of view, be heard, and be able to therefore challenge the dominant notion of what is good for all. Because this is the way the practice of participatory research actually needs to be understood. There are specific techniques and tools that one can use, but the lens is an analysis of unequal relations of power and how those who are relatively powerless, their point of view, their knowledge, their experience, their voice is articulated, heard, and is able to influence improvements in their context, in their lives, in their practice. The second point is that all along in the work that we did, we used the concept of demystification. Demystification of dominant knowledge. So those of you involved in occupational health may remember that when we began our work on occupational health in 1983, we discovered very soon that there was an ILO encyclopedia on occupational health, this thick, and that was the Bible on occupational health. And workers' point of view about health and safety, as a couple of you have mentioned, was generally dismissed by managers and certainly by researchers from official institutions. So what we did was we bought 2-3 copies of this book and gave it to workers and explained to them what this contains a little bit. So when they would articulate their point of view, they'll keep this book next to them. So the other party will think these guys are knowledgeable. They've got this book and we haven't seen this book. So the ILO encyclopedia on occupational health and safety. So demystification helps. And I think in the context of new technology, that is an important lesson to keep in mind. That how new technology can be demystified. Some 10-15 years ago it happened with computers and our digital world. Now with the smartphones and other forms of technology. But there is a challenge which is perhaps not so easily understandable in the cyber world, which is more visible in the physical world. And that is the relations of power. It means that just because I am on the Facebook and so is Mr. Modi, or just because I have a bird tweeting and so is his bird tweeting, that we are on somewhat similar footing. So the cyber world tends to sometimes obfuscate or hide relations of power because it is a cyber world. And so I think the technology provides an opening for outreach, voice in a way that was not available in the past. But we have to approach technology with this sense of, is everybody on the cyber world on the same platform, or they are on the same stage of relations of power, or there is some way of understanding relations of power in the cyberspace. It's an area of investigation, but demystification of technology is also a concurrent process that I think we should use because it can enable greater voice from the hitherto powerless. So I just wanted to make those couple of reflections. There are other questions we'll come back to and also the future. I want to move on and I'm going to suggest that we request Walter to share findings of a global survey